From above, a surveillance drone monitored the scene and sent worrying updates to Mission Command. The Iranians were preparing for immediate takeoff. At precisely 2:07 p.m., FA-18 superfighter jets Hornets accelerated sharply toward Kerman Airport, aiming to intercept 3 invaluable Iranian aircraft. The moment the American pilots unleashed maximum engine power, an enemy operator entered the scene, demonstrating a lethal readiness for combat. The aviators, identified by the codes Raven 1 and Raven 2, attempted to circumvent the dangers by performing an extensive maneuver over Balochistan, but the desert environment offered no protection. Suddenly, Raven 1's radar warning system emitted the characteristic and feared sound of an imminent threat, indicating that a high-frequency electronically scanned array radar had locked onto them. The danger came from a Tor M1 unit hidden in the mountains 12 kilometers away. Operating silently and stealthily, like a watchful lookout in a dark place, the anti-aircraft battery kept its systems disabled until the last second. As soon as the Super Hornets appeared on the horizon, the enemy ignored any identification or search protocol, directly activating the targeting system. It was an immediate and aggressive attack, forcing the lead pilot to react instantly, preparing countermeasures defenses while stabilizing the aircraft. The projectile fired by the Tor system is comparable to a massive structure moving at almost 3 times the speed of sound, capable of performing extreme pressure maneuvers that would exceed the physical limits of any human being by 4 times. Furthermore, the Iranian radar technology switched frequencies with such agility that it rendered electronic jamming systems practically useless, resembling a dialogue in which the speaker constantly changes dialect. Faced with such lethality, the pilots who had survived the 11 days of conflict had only one survival tactic learned in practice: fire once, shut down, and escape as fast as possible before the Americans can react. Raven 1 pulled hard on the control stick and sustained 6 Gs. The horizon turned vertical, and the desert floor filled the canopy. Behind it, AL-47 dispensers released chaff, aluminum-coated fibers that spread out and created a radar echo the same size as the aircraft. The ALQ-214 jamming system injected false range data into the tracking frequency. This caused the missile to point into empty space, about 500 meters behind the aircraft. Raven 2 broke off to the opposite side, splitting the formation and forcing the battery crew to choose a target. They chose Raven 1. The chaff and false jammer data corrupted the tracking solution, while the 6G maneuver altered the geometry enough to throw the jet completely out of the seeker's prediction cone. The warhead detonated behind and below. Distance from the fragments? No direct impact, but close enough to shake the fuselage and ruin his flight suit. Inside the Tor M1 system, the commander decided not to fire again and ordered a retreat, but his action had already achieved its objective, forcing the jets into evasive maneuvers. The high-load turn diverted the formation from its planned route and pushed it into an unexpected area, exactly where a mobile Iranian radar was positioned in a mountain pass. This unit didn't need to take down anything, it just needed to detect. Upon identifying the contacts, the operator relayed the information through simple means, since communications had been degraded by previous attacks. The alert quickly reached other units, creating a new layer of risk for the mission. Meanwhile, one of the pilots was beginning to deal with the consequences of the maneuver. The targeting pod, responsible for the accuracy of the attacks, had been compromised. The gyroscopes lost stability, and the infrared image became unstable. In practice, the system ceased to be reliable. The problem was more serious than it seemed. Internal damage meant the equipment was not only inaccurate, but also operating erratically. The only way to compensate would be to fly lower, where the target would occupy more space in the field of vision. but this meant entering the range of short-range defense systems. In the end, Tor didn't need to hit the target. It broke the mission by forcing a sequence of events: route deviation, exposure to new radars, and degradation of attack systems. In modern combat, sometimes it's not necessary to destroy the target. It's enough to disable its ability to act. He blinded Raven 2 and was about to force it into the altitude range where ground defenses were most effective. On Kerman, a ground controller answered a still-ringing field phone, listened for 4 seconds, and ran off down the runway. Fighter jets were approaching. Fuel trucks were removed from the chocks in seconds, a response time that would impress any air force in the world, considering these teams had spent 11 days watching American precision munitions turn everything around them into wreckage. Inside the cockpit, the flight engineer was already activating the switches on the overhead panel. APU startup sequence. The process begins with 4 to 5 minutes of supplying compressed air to each of the 4 turbofans. Soloviev, about 90 seconds per engine. If all went well, the Il-76 could be taxiing before the Americans arrived. Nearly 13,000 kilometers away, at Creech Air Force Base, a Reaper sensor operator was observing everything in real time. The operator activated the satellite link. Activity at the target, engines starting on the heavy aircraft. Reaper's fuel level reached its minimum after about 20 hours of continuous operation, longer than most people stay awake in a day. The mission wasn't over, but the fuel was. The operator made one last scan of the runway, recorded the time, and turned south toward Djibouti. The screen was left with only the empty desert. The replacement Reaper was 30 minutes away. The Ravens were 25 minutes away. For the next 5 minutes, no one on the American side could see Cremont Airfield. The Ravens continued orbiting while the fuel burned, and the Il-76 crew progressed through the checklist unnoticed. But here's what the Americans couldn't see during those 5 blind minutes. The Il-76 wasn't just firing up its engines to evacuate. Ground crews were carrying boxes up the rear ramp, long, olive-green containers that didn't match any standard logistics manifest. Whatever the Revolutionary Guard was trying to retrieve from Cremont was worth more to them than the aircraft itself. The CAOC in Al Udeid, the Combined Air Operations Center responsible for air control throughout the war, kept the Ravens on standby. Without ISR coverage, there was no authorization to use weapons. Standard procedure that made perfect sense from a headquarters some 1,450 kilometers away, where the coffee was hot and ejection seats were just theory, and made absolutely no sense inside a cockpit consuming fuel that couldn't be wasted. At Cremont, those same 5 minutes provided everything the garrison needed. The controller had already put trucks with Zu-23 cannons into motion even before the first orbit was completed. By the 3rd minute, a team with MiSOG-2 manpads was already positioned on the roof of the maintenance hangar with the launcher supported on their shoulders. The MiSOG-2 is the Iranian version of the Chinese Qiuadyuba U-1, which in turn is based on the Russian Igla, making it practically a copy of a copy. And, like any 3rd-generation replica, it works well enough to ruin your day. The replacement Reaper entered the area at an altitude of approximately 7,000 meters, an MQ-9 equipped with a multi-spectral targeting system like the one you see here, capable of reading a license plate from over 6 kilometers high, controlled by an operator in a trailer at Creech Air Base via something resembling an extremely expensive video game with a delay of about 600 milliseconds via satellite. The operator pointed the sensor at the runway, and the image came back clear. All 3 confirmed, APU active on the heavy aircraft, recommendation for immediate attack, authorization granted, 16 minutes to target. The damaged targeting pod and the 5-minute head start, both a consequence of the Tor M1, awaited on the other side. Raven 1 swept the airfield from the maximum range of the Atfler. The advanced infrared pod installed under the fuselage, essentially a thermal telescope, allows the pilot to observe the target at a distance where ground defenses cannot react. The leader's pod was clear, image-stable, exactly the type of visual the system was designed for. Two pickup trucks with twin-barreled Zu-23 anti-aircraft guns were positioned at opposite ends of the runway, north and south. The Zu-23 unleashed 23mm projectiles at a brutal rate, without radar, without warning, just an unpredictable wall of fire. It was simple, cheap, and effective. Meanwhile, a manpads operator on the roof anticipated the next move, tracking the jet by heat and trajectory. The defenses created a clear dilemma. Flying high meant suffering from GPS interference and losing accuracy. Flying low increased accuracy, but placed the aircraft directly within range of ground weapons. The GBU-38 JDAM missiles, accurate to within a few meters under ideal conditions, lost efficiency under electronic interference, increasing the error and reducing the chance of a direct hit on smaller targets. The only solution was to descend, shortening the fall time and improving the impact, but descending meant entering the kill zone. Raven 1 tried. It initiated the dive, locked onto the target, everything according to the manual, until the Zu-23 opened fire. Without warning, just trails cutting through the air exactly at the point of interception. A curtain of steel sufficient to transform precision into immediate risk. The pilot reacted at the limit, activating afterburner and aborting the attack seconds before launch. A mission interrupted not by a sophisticated system, but by a simple and persistent weapon. On the roof, the manpads operator didn't fire. He observed. He calculated, he waited. After days of combat, those still on the field were not only the best equipped, they were the ones who could think one step ahead. Raven 2 couldn't wait. The Il-76 had already been running for 25 minutes with its engine starting up, showing visible thermal activity in the infrared, the only target that could disappear if they lost another 60 seconds dealing with the Zu-23 problem. Raven 1 climbed again to gain altitude, while its wingman took off alone against the heavy transport. At approximately 3,000 meters, 600 meters lower than the previous attempt, forced to that altitude by a targeting pod that had been damaged 40 minutes and almost 500 kilometers earlier. The targeting pod crossed to the left above the Il-76's wing, corrected too far to the right, stabilized for half a second on the center line, and he triggered the firing at that minimal instant of stability. The entire attack solution depended on a single moment when the system functioned. The GBU-38 detached from the pylon, its tail kit deploying. 4 fins became fixed in the airflow while the GPS receiver attempted to acquire a signal from the satellites. The signal it found was already being interfered with. GPS interference wasn't a complete blockage, but a constant noise that distorted the position solution. The bomb continuously corrected its trajectory, balancing signal and interference in an unstable descent. Each adjustment was an attempt to maintain course amidst inaccurate data. When the solution experienced a more abrupt deviation, the fins reacted at the limit, correcting beyond what was necessary and returning to center, not for stability, but for continuous compensation. It was active control, fighting until the last second. At that moment, a short-range missile was launched. The pilot reacted instantly, turning the aircraft and releasing flares. The missile system had to decide between the hotter signature of the flares and the larger signature of the aircraft. The maneuver forced an error. The missile followed the false target and detonated behind it. The aircraft survived, but the pilot completely lost sight of the bomb. Even so, it continued its final trajectory, adjusting itself until impact. The result was sufficient. The aircraft on the ground was destroyed, unable to take off. But the evasion came at a cost. The jet was pushed off course, entering the firing arc of a simple anti-aircraft defense. The same cannon that had already interrupted a previous attack now posed a threat again. In the end, the scenario shows a clear reality of modern warfare. Advanced technology can be degraded, diverted, and even neutralized by simple systems. And often, the outcome depends less on the equipment and more on who can adapt first. The gunner already had the firing angle from the first pass. He observed both attempts, mentally calculated the geometry, and was now adjusting for a better shot. Both barrels opened fire, and the tracers rose through the space where the jet had been half a second before. At that distance and speed of approach, the gunner was placing projectiles inside a volume the size of a house, and the Super Hornet needed to pass through the gaps between them. Raven 2 dodged with slight corrections, sufficient movement to render the ballistic prediction inaccurate due to the fuselage's width, shots coming from behind, more fuel being consumed than both pilots could count on their fingers. Raven 1 returned via the northeast on a completely different route. The first pass revealed the position of the ZU-23 to the south. Raven 2's action revealed where the man-pads operator was positioned. He positioned the maintenance hangar between his attack trajectory and the roof, using concrete and steel to block the operator's line of sight during the critical 3 seconds. The FLIR locked onto P-3. That 51-year-old aircraft had been manufactured by Lockheed in Burbank at a time when Iranian crews were still training in California under the Shah's command. The plane withstood the revolution and conflicts with Iraq thanks to an exhaustive maintenance effort, operating with components that the United States stopped supplying back in the 70s. In 2019, this same American-made machine even confronted the Navy that created it by flying over the USS Essex. However, the moment of reckoning came with the launch of a GBU-38. Even facing electronic interference from Chinese technology, the bomb corrected its trajectory during the fall and hit the target's wing. The fuel cells exploded instantly, ending half a century of operations for an aircraft that was destroyed by a weapon manufactured just a few kilometers from its own original workshop. As it headed toward its final objective, Raven 1 encountered heavy fire from a ZU-23 cannon positioned to the north. The enemy gunner, having observed the previous passes, adjusted his sights with increasing precision as tracer projectiles cut through the air. Inside the cockpit, the low fuel warning flashed on the display, indicating that refueling over the Gulf of Oman had become a matter of life or death. Each additional moment over the airport increased the risk of a disaster in the Arabian Sea instead of a safe landing on the aircraft carrier Lincoln. Only one bomb remained to complete the mission. A C-130, another example of American engineering acquired by Iran decades ago, appeared on the target monitor. The shot was fired, the guidance system overcame the interference, and the bomb pierced the center of the fuselage, ensuring the complete success of the operation with 3 targets destroyed. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Until next time.